This time it's the best British motorcycles of the 1950s, Part 1. The 1950s was the golden era for the British motorcycle industry. Sales boomed in the early part of the decade, although sales of all motorcycles would go into decline towards the end of the decade, and in fact would never recover. But for this video we're going to take a slightly unusual approach. We're going to pick 5 major British companies for each video and decide what we think is their best model. Now this won't necessarily be their most glamorous or their most expensive, but instead we're going to look at what we think offers the best all-round package. The AJS Model 16 and 18. AJS's Model 18 and 19 are representative of AMC's big pre-unit singles. Now we could of course have gone for the parallel twins like the G12 and the G11, but for me the AMC singles are some of the best of the breed, with a lineage dating all the way back to the pre-war matchless G80. Now you may think the two machines are identical bar the badges, but if you look at the models shown here you'll notice that on the AJS the mag dyno is mounted before the engine and on the Maxus is mounted after. Later these would converge into a common design, but certainly earlier on there was some attempt to give the bikes a personality of their own. The first models are on a very traditional bore and stroke dimension of 82.5 by 93, giving a 498cc capacity. Although for competition models such as the 18 and 16 CS, these dimensions would be changed, with the CS running at 86 by 85.5 bore and stroke to run over square dimensions. And the machine would start the decade using a 4-speed Berman gearbox, although this would be superseded by a unit of AMC's own design in 1956. At the top end there was hairpin valve springs, as fitted to the Norton Manx of course, and as befitting a big British single there was a valve spring compressor at the top end to make starting a little bit easier. First major engine mods came in 1957 with the adoption of the Lucas RM15 alternator replacing the old dynamo. And the same year we see the adoption of an aluminium casting for the primary chain case, replacing the very leak-prone pressed steel item. And at the end of the decade there will be a completely redesigned cylinder head, now using a flat top piston with valve cutaways, and the adoption of an all-new single down tube frame in 1960. Okay, so never cutting edge, but after a big single, whether a 350 or a 500, AMC are possibly the best. The Ariel Cyclone. The Cyclone is a machine representative of the end of Ariel's big 4-stroke production, coming as it did at a time when Ariel's concentrated all their attention on the production of their all-new 2-strokes, the Leader and the Arrow. The engine used is of course based on BSA's A10 power unit, so the Cyclone gives us a good example not only of Ariel's qualities but also those of BSA's parallel twin pre-unit engine. The engine is of 646cc with a bore and stroke of 70 by 64, and although it makes use of the iron head from BSA's touring model the Golden Flash, and is thus a bit quieter running than the aluminium heads used on the other sporting models from BSA, it is handily more powerful than that fitted to the Golden Flash. And with its high compression ratio of 8.3 to 1, the machine claims 40 horsepower at 6,300 RPM for a top speed of around 105 miles an hour. No bad thing for a machine aimed squarely at the US market. And there the machine would enjoy some modest success, with its most famous owner being the rock legend Buddy Holly. While the machine's power unit is essentially an A10 of course, the rest of the bike feels very different. The Ariel chassis has a character all of its own, especially in the Cyclone where high American style bars are used. And as with many Ariels, the machine used a Berman gearbox, which is very characterful, although not really as nice in use as BSA's fine gearbox used in the A10. But overall the Cyclone is a great machine and a very suitable way for Ariel to sign off on its big 4-stroke production. The Triumph Tiger 110. Now most people would have expected me to plumb for the T120 Bonneville at this point, but in truth the Bonneville didn't arrive until 1959, the very end of the decade, and it really was quite conservatively styled in its first model, so it didn't really come into its own until the early 60s. but for the majority of the decade the Tiger 110 was top dog in Triumph's range. The machine had arrived in 1953, with sales starting in earnest for the 1954 season, and was based on the earlier Thunderbird 650 Tourer model, with both machines initially at least sharing the same cast iron cylinder head, although the 110 would soon adopt an aluminium head on cast iron barrels. The engine was an overhead valve parallel twin of 649 cc's, with a bore and stroke of 71 by 82. Compression ratio was 8:1, with the engine producing some 40 horsepower at 6,500 rpm. And the machine is of course named the Tiger 110, alluding to a top speed claim of 110 miles an hour, and indeed a period road test by Cycle magazine found the mean top speed to be 109 miles an hour. The gearbox was a 4-speed unit of Triumph's own design and was available with a lower geared option for sidecar use. How very 1950s. By the standards of the time, the Tiger 110's acceleration was said to be very good. This is helped by a fairly low dry weight of 177 kilos or 390 pounds. Although in truth this lightweight was achieved because the single down tube frame was a bit on the skimpy side and not the most rigid of the period. While the machine did not have the out and out handling of say BSA's A10 or the class leading Norton, it was still pretty damn good actually, and certainly good enough to make the Tiger 110 a major sales success during the 1950s. The Norton Dominator 99. The Norton Dominator 99 is like so many British machines in that it owes its existence to the US market. The first Dominator, the Model 77, was of 500cc's and arrived just after the war. This was then superseded by the Dominator 88, which made use of the featherbed frame. But in the all-important US market, the 88's performance of just around 90 miles an hour was not seen as sufficient, although the racebed chassis, the famous featherbed, was seen as the best available at the time, and would indeed influence the designs of chassis used by the Japanese and Europeans well into the 1970s. But in the US market, the Norton was losing sales to Triumph's Thunderbird and the BSA Gold Flash, both of which were 650s, leaving Norton with little option but to enlarge the capacity of their motor. And so in 1956 Berthold would redesign the engine, taking the capacity out to 597 cc's. By increasing both the bore and the stroke of the 500cc engine, taking the stroke from 66 to 72.6mm and the bore from 68 to 82mm. While this did result in an increase of overall vibration, this was deemed acceptable given the power improvements it delivered. The first model ran a 7.6 compression ratio and had a single AML carburetor, although the later 99SS model would run twin carbs. 1958 would see a move to battery coil ignition, although interest in the machine reverted back to using a magneto in 1962, and another change would see the switch to an AMC gearbox in 1957, a move which was seen as an improvement, although the AMC gearbox would struggle in the later Commando, particularly in race form. The chassis used was the so-called wide-line featherbed frame, based on the original race frame designed by the McCandless brothers. The rear suspension was handled by a couple of Girling units, although at the front there was a famous road holder fork, altogether making up the finest handling machine of the period, and a much needed sales success for Norton and its parent company AMC in that all-important US market. The BSA Gold Star. The Gold Star is BSA's most iconic machine of the period, but in this case I've gone for the slightly less desirable 350. One, because it's usually available slightly cheaper, but also, as with many sports machines of almost any period, the machine with a slightly smaller capacity is often the sweetest. Something that was as true in the 1950s as it was years later with the 916 and 748 Ducatis. First Gold Star arrived in 1938 and was a more sporty development of the earlier Empire Star, one of which Will Handley had famously used to do a 100-mile-an-hour lap of Brooklands, a feat for which both he and the machine were awarded a Gold Star badge, thus handing BSA some excellent publicity and a great name for their next sporting model. Today when people talk about Gold Stars, most of the attention will go on the 500cc model, but in fact in the post-war period it was the 350 model that stole most of the headlines in terms of production race wins, racking up dozens of wins in the Clubman series before the Gold Star 500 really got into its stride later on. The 350 model ran a bore and stroke of 71 by 88, giving 348 cc's, and by the mid-50s the engine was giving out some 30 horsepower. enough for a top speed of just over 90 miles an hour. And the 350 enjoyed a great deal of competition success in trials, scrambling and of course on road. So with adequate and user-friendly performance, you may well say that the Gold Star 350 offers just enough of everything. What other bikes or collections of bikes would you like to see us cover in a future video? Maybe you've got a bike we can use for a test ride. Either way, get in touch below. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.